Okay, whilst we're settling down, I'm going to ask the first question. And anybody who wants to answer within the time can do so. And the question is this. It goes back to Anders' question of what is the agenda that we should set. AIs are not very good at setting agendas. What is actually the question that we should be discussing next? Those of us who care passionately about the future, those of us who want to get successfully to 2025 and beyond. We've had a lot of discussion in the last 2 days. What is the one remaining big topic that you would recommend that we human futurists continue to discuss as a high priority, possibly even having a 2-day conference about it in the not too distant future? Don't let that constrain your thinking so much. So, do you have questions to ask? Answer?
Okay. My question that I would like to see answered is, how do we stop wasting time and effort on things which are likely to be fruitless? Because I think Anders came up with a comment called the hype cycle. And often that is an effect of people not thinking upfront of second-order problems, even though they are often apparent. And I think that given we have a limited amount of both money and talent and resource, avoiding going down blind alleys and asking what the blind alleys are out there is a worthwhile question.
Who else wants to answer that? Manish?
For me, it would be citizen engagement. So actually, it's great that we can get together and think about all these big topics, and obviously we can go and influence our circles, but what is it that's going to make 7 billion care about the future and want to be a part of it? So how can we engage the citizens more fully in this question? Peter?
I want to raise questions about existential risk. I think it's very good to have constructive conversations. Ultimately, what we don't want is to end up in some dystopic outcome. That seems like that should be very high on our list of priorities. So how can we make sure, or what can we actually do to nudge the direction that humanity goes, that we end up in the sorts of states that we would enjoy being in?
Natasha?
How can each one of us participate in building a stronger academic sphere for transhumanism and its many different variables, the different cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary fields? Got to get it into education, have to start teaching it, whether it's within a brick structure or online somehow. We have to do it soon.
Preconditions for Humanity Plus University. Anybody else? Anders? Yep. And then Callum, and then we'll move on.
Yep. I think we're fairly dumb, but we should try to become smarter. Which is, for those of you who know me, of course, always what I say. But in particular, this question about our cognitive biases, there are some of them that are really seriously hurting us, like overconfidence in some of our models. There are some of them that are making our intellectual system in society really broken. We need to fix that. So in particular, I think I want to debug the epistemic system of our society.
Right, so developing many of the themes in your talk. Callum?
Wary of the danger of being a one-trick pony, I think we should be thinking about how to survive the arrival of superintelligence.
It's worth having a conference in its own right. Ben?
Yes, I'm just thinking about this. I really do agree with the education one particularly, and the one about general social engagement. I would say probably, how can we rapidly and sustainably deploy mechanisms for feeding the global population as soon as possible without the buy-in of governments and corporations, because they've proven themselves rather uninterested in that. I would say that.
Eamon?
Yeah, I'm just bringing together a few of the points we've made. The idea that we can distribute activities, so having events that are less a select group of views being spread out to other people, but having workshops, that kind of thing, events that spawn other events. I think that would be an interesting way to try to turn this into a community that explores trying to do things rather than just talk about things. I think that might be a good way to start.
Building a community of action and practice.
Yeah.
David Pearce.
Yeah, thank you. I could come up with various superficial generalities and woolly-minded observations.
Are you commenting on your fellow panelists' remarks there?
Not at all, not at all. It's just only platitudes popped into my head. I will just say one thing, though, that we have talked today. I would say the three core themes that I would identify with transhumanism. I would love to see greater cross-fertilization between the different currents of futurism and transhumanism. And that I worry sometimes that there are these semi-independent solar systems, and I don't always quite see where the gears connect, if you'll pardon my rather archaic metaphors.
So building a wider community of futurists. My answer to that question, I think, on reflection, is that I'm really puzzled as to how we can come up with a better economic system. I think that many of the decisions which we take are influenced by biases in our psychology, which we can probably know how to fix, the limitations in our philosophy, which we can probably address, but many of the decisions we take as a society are governed by things that are wrong with our economy, and I wish I knew how to fix them. And I know there are quite a few people from Zeitgeist here who would advocate, well, we don't need a society with money, and we should get rid of the profit motive. And I really don't know how to make up my mind about that question, because in one part of me I say, yeah, surely there's lots wrong with money and the profit motive, but on the other hand, I'm not sure how we'd work without it. So that is something that I raise as a question because I don't know the answer. So that is one. You know the answer? Oh, well. Now, we now move from the questions to the answers. But I'm going to take the microphone to the audience in a minute. So,
just very quickly, I believe, in the 21st century, our personal data is going to be a new asset class. So I believe, again, we can start to have leverage. We can leverage these institutions that have dominated us because we're going to be in control of our own data.
So who's got the key question? Okay, Roland?
One topic that I haven't heard discussed so much here is when we become able to change what we want and to change how we feel about things, then we will set off, each individual will set off a process of continuous changes. How do we avoid splitting up in many different branches that have nothing to do with each other? How do we avoid killing each other? How do we avoid that those who make themselves most ruthless and eager dominate us all?
Several questions in there. Who wants to answer?
Deep psychological question. It seems that people argue and fight when they're not satisfied. If each person could identify what he or she needs and wants out of life and find it, that would resolve a lot of conflict. I think it's basic psychology.
Anders, then Callum.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I'm actually doing some game theory analysis of this very question with a PhD student. And I don't have a clear answer yet. Generally, any technology that changes your motivation is a very risky technology. The drug use is just the start of it, in a sense. So figuring out how to control the technologies of motivation might actually be a really important long-term problem. So I would certainly want to devote more time to it.
Steven Pinker's recent book, The Better Angels of Ourselves, is a really interesting description of how human societies have become less and less violent and less conflict prone over the last, in fact, throughout our history, pretty much. Even taking into account the First and Second World War, the last century was less violent than the previous one. Extraordinary, but true. So I'm reasonably confident that this side of AGI, things will probably carry on getting better. I realise I'm in a tiny minority in this room in that I actually think capitalism is a good thing. The other side of the AGI, if we get that, and if we survive it, I think possibilities get to be fantastic if we survive it. We could quite possibly all live in virtual realities with a real abundance, and so conflict would pretty much disappear. Mm-hmm. But that's one possibility of many.
To follow on from Callum, yes, Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, is the title. It makes an interesting point. Yes, it does say that overt physical state, non-state, and interstate violence has gone down. But, ladies and gentlemen, the kind of violence that has gone up and that is explicitly not in Pinker's book is structural violence, which is the implicit violence based in class, based in the haves versus have-nots, and that is exerting astonishing amounts of psychosocial stress, not to mention the fact that the ultimate violence has been delivered from killing each other to wiping out the environment. This needs to be recognized. So that's the other side, I would say. That violence is coming back.
Yes, but we have to consider that the haves and the have-nots is not really logical, because there's more people who, in the 1990s, I remember downtown Los Angeles, there were more people who had cell phones from the developing countries than people that had good paying jobs over 40,000 a year. So when you look at the divide between the haves and the have-nots, it's getting narrower and narrower and narrower. Plus, the haves, the more they purchase, it brings the cost down. It's all about economics.
Okay, we'll give the other panelists a chance to answer in a moment. I want to take a few more comments from the audience first.
Longevity was mentioned a few times as one of the desired goals here. And I just wonder if you don't think that actually there is quite a lot of risk here, because we're already struggling to feed the world as it is, not to mention specific areas in the world at the moment. And don't you think that it will be better to improve quality of life for those who are actually alive?
That's one good question. I'm going to take three in a row, and then I'll get the audience, the panelists, to comment on any of these.
Picking up on Manish's point about data as an asset class, we're hearing people talk about future asset classes being things like the right to have children, the right to live in a city or country, the right to buy food, the right to education, the right to a job. What do the panelists think? Is the idea of an asset class old hat in the world we're talking about, or what could the new asset classes be in 2025 and beyond?
So hold that thought, and one more question here.
A lot of you make forecasts about how the future is going to pan out. Would any of you be interested in putting your money where your mouth is and actually making bets on likely outcomes? And would this be a good way of promoting people who make accurate forecasts and taxing people who talk smack?
So you've had three questions. Let's run through the panel quickly, starting with Eamon and going to Peter. Answer as many or as little of these as you can in 1 minute.
On that final point, for me personally, I'd take that bet, but that's only because I just said the stakes are going to be really high. I deliberately didn't say which way things were going to go. So I find it hard to imagine I could lose. But that said, there might be no change in the next decade and we'll be back exactly where we are now, in which case I'd pay up happily. But and I couldn't speak to asset classes. That's not something I'd really say about that.
Okay, pass the microphone on.
Yeah.
I won't give you my predictions, but I would put money on the one issued by NASA less than a week ago, saying that essentially we have about 2 decades left before we either remodel our society to be more equitable. I won't say redistribute wealth because I don't think that's the answer. Or we end up violently self-destructing. I would put money on that, and I don't mind being taxed if they're wrong, because then I'll be alive to pay that tax. I'll leave asset classes too. I know when I'm beaten.
And also, don't forget the longevity question as well. Manish, which of these do you want to answer?
So just in terms of the longevity, I have done a around the world trip. I saw with my own eyes that we have raped this planet as a species. The planet is 75% overpopulated. I'm not convinced that we should have infinite lifespan and choose when we want to die. I think it's unfair to future generations. In terms of on the point about asset classes, so one of the things I see as I forgot to put it in my presentation, that all this technology is great and this vision for the future. It's at risk of increasing inequality, especially in health, because one of the things that still exists, the problem is if you look in Europe, across the EU, out of 500 million people, 100 million have never used the internet. In Greece, it's 65% of people have never used the internet. In the Netherlands, it's only 5%. So again, given we want to go down this route of the internet of things, everything connected, we need to sort of get the fundamentals right first.
On the longevity question, I'd refer you to Aubrey's presentation yesterday, which I thought was really good, and his comment that you don't need to reduce the birth rate very much at all to cater for the extra number of people we get through by postponing or actually removing death. Really interesting mathematics, the way that works out. On the point about putting your money where your mouth is on the forecast, I'm saying that we don't know anything, and I didn't make any forecasts, so I'm bulletproof on that.
Longevity, population in Western Europe is going down, population in Eastern Europe is going down. This could be a trend. Also, we have to consider the fact that space exploration is all of a sudden come back again thanks to the X Prize. I'm chairing a session on transhumanism at the International Space Development Conference in Los Angeles coming up soon. We're going to be talking about population growth. We're going to be talking about near-Earth habitats and the whole new field and industry of space exploration in our solar system and near Earth. So I think that will resolve a lot of the problems that we're facing with overpopulation. I think desktop publishing, Peter Diamandis' book on abundance rings true to Philip Van Niedervelde's original idea about abundance, and I think there's something to be said there. About making predictions, I don't. About betting, I don't. About the future, I think that we will become the AGI. So I'll pass the baton here.
Thank you. It's actually relevant to recognize that dying means human capital is destroyed. Actually, having a short lifespan means that a lot of human capital gets destroyed in poorer nations. So having people stay around for longer would actually have a really strong economic effect. When it comes to betting, I'm willing to bet, except that I'm probably going to be using confidence intervals that are so broad that you're not going to want to bet with me. And asset classes, well, the main thing is what cannot be reproduced, what is kind of unique. And I think attention, that is a key one. And time. It's actually worth realizing that when thinking about sustainability, we talk about finite resources, but time is also one of them. So it might be that the computer scientists who are all about optimizing how quickly you can deliver an answer to something might actually be relevant for thinking about the kind of green economy of time.
I think, coming back to the earlier question about motivation, I think one of the things we will see is better tools, whether they're internet-based or crowdsourced, to decode and make transparent various people's motivations for doing things. So I think that will perhaps take the sting out of some of the more malevolent ones. I completely agree with the idea of either a betting or a marketplace for ideas and forecasts. And indeed, I'm a technology industry analyst, and I often challenge companies to put their money where their mouth is and do a bet with me on particular technology adoptions. Unfortunately, none of the executives have yet taken me up on that, and I rather wish they would. So I think if there's a way of systematizing that, I think that would be interesting. Whether it would show up the wisdom of crowds or the wisdom of individual, either lucky or successful predictors and forecasters is another matter.
Okay. Thank you. Four questions, very briefly. Preferences, meta-preferences, meta-desires. I think it's worth recognizing that all sentient beings, however diverse, are in an important sense fundamentally the same, whether they are flatworm, pigs, babies, humans, or transhumans, and that we all have a pleasure-pain axis, and without a pleasure-pain axis, frankly, nothing would inherently matter at all. And I would very much hope that technologies of naturalized telepathy will help us to enrich our conception of intelligence and post-human superintelligence so that our perspective-taking skills can be vastly magnified. Longevity, what really does impair so many people's lives today is age and age-related diseases and decline. So I think that should be a priority. No one is ever harmed by not existing. I don't think we have a priority to go on multiplying. Let's focus on people alive today. Though, of course, that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be thinking about the very long-term future. I think we should. Assets, new asset classes, something like internet domain names, for example, I think will continue to expand in value because only one person can own, cars.com, arts.com, loans.com, but I'm not an investment specialist, so don't take me too seriously. Markets, though it's a superficially attractive idea, I think this kind of market-based approach is here. You're wasting cognitive resources that should be focused on the task in hand. That money makes so many people completely irrational. We've just had the near meltdown of the Western financial system. If the Fed hadn't bailed out the banks, they'd have gone under and taken the rest of the Fortune 500 with them. Basically, markets are a recipe for irrationality in so many areas. I could say more, but I'm going to pass over to Peter.
So longevity, I don't think there's an undue focus. I think for a lot of the reasons that we've already heard, it's an incredibly important area. Naturally, we don't want to focus in just one area. All of the things that we've heard about, the ideas of the three supers, we want to be pursuing all of the ideas at once as much as we possibly can. On predictions, yeah, I'm not particularly interested in when people predict what's going to happen. I think the history of predictions is comedically awful. I think it's much more interesting to talk about the kinds of worlds we want to see rather than what individuals think they will see. That's the kind of conversation I want to be having. That's the kind of conversation I feel like is productive at conferences like this.
Two more quick questions down here.
I was wondering, I guess to the majority of the public, many of transhumanist ideas are really frightening and uncanny and dangerous and so on. Are there any of you any ideas that you find uncanny or frightening in the same sense, not meaning like dangerous or potentially catastrophic, but that freaks you out basically?
Boy bands.
Yeah, this morning during the great speech of Amon Twyman, there was one sentence I really disagree. It was when we said traditional political systems are incapable of solving the really serious problem. I think that, well, the traditional political systems you mean at the moment, it's the democratic political systems. And I think they were quite good the last 50 years to improve the world. Well, with probably the big exception of global warming, but okay. And is it not very important for us to convince the political leaders and the general public, but so in a democratic way of working, to convince that there are positive technological progress, especially in the especially the progress concerning longevity. So I think this should be the most important goal in democratic terms, and I would like to have your opinion.
So we had one question on shock level 4. What's your shock level 4, effectively? And we had a question on wouldn't it be better to work with politicians rather than to say they're bound to fail? And we've got 30 seconds each per panelist, so it gives us the last 6 minutes. Which end wants to start? All right, Eamon, you do the same order as before.
15 seconds per question then. Right, I would actually hazard a guess that I don't think I know anything that freaks me out in a sort of on a weird level, apart from though we just laughed. I swear I heard somebody say boy bands. They unnerved me. But I would say that there is something that was at the top of Callum's scale, the idea of a bad singularity in which you're effectively being tortured forever, one way or another. This is not out of the realms of possibility and deeply scary and deeply freaky. The other thing, Didier, I would say that, now I'm being a bit flippant here, but I've got about 7 seconds. If traditional political institutions could fix the problems that are in front of us now, why haven't they done it yet?
Okay, give the next panelist a chance to answer.
We have seen, as you have all demonstrated over the last couple of days, amazing jumps in the orders of magnitude of what technology can do, all the way down to the nanoscale. And unfortunately, as you get further down to the nanoscale, you also get nano weapons on the horizon. And yet our values within our society are still very much aggressive and all the rest of it. And I think there's nothing more dangerous than having values that have not caught up yet to responsibly deal with the kind of technologies that we have. It's been covered by one of the talks earlier where you say you're always lagging behind it. It's the big thing, and it's where all the catastrophes are going to come from, in my opinion, is the misuse of them, of any technology, particularly a destructive one, by the almost Bronze Age mentality that we still seem to have.
Manish?
What frightens me is that despite all these conversations, in 10 years' time, very little progress will have been made in tackling these fundamental challenges facing us. Second of all, in terms of politicians, I firmly believe in having a mindset of collaborating rather than competing, and also recognizing that rather than playing the blame game with politicians, that we understand the human aspects of being a politician as well, and their challenges and their frustrations, and how we can help.
Colin?
Something that weirds me out: believing in things for which you have absolutely no evidence and really make no sense. That's a pretty decent definition of insanity. And well, thanks, but you don't know what I'm going to say yet. And I think that's a pretty good description of religion. And in fact, I think that religion is organized insanity. And what's terrifying is that probably 90% of our fellow humans are religious. That weirds me out. As for politicians, democracy is the worst possible system, except for all of the others. And politicians are like nappies. They both need changing regularly for exactly the same reason.
I think we're having some kind of metaphysical Okay, what really freaks me out, it has to do with what you just said about, freaks me out is the tyranny of a collective fundamentalist group. Religion seems to be the most tyrannical religious collective. That really frightens me to no end. Okay, that's possible. About politicians, I just don't think it works. I tried. I joined the Green Party. I was elected by smashing success in Los Angeles County for the 20th Senatorial District on the Green Party ticket as a transhumanist, thinking that technology could influence the Green Party. No way. Greenpeace, Green Party, no way. It doesn't, no matter how wonderful you think it is, how ecologically sound, it just doesn't work. There's too much fighting inside. Vote on ideas, not people.
Anders, do you talk to politicians?
Oh yes, and the main thing I learned is, they're as stupid as us. This goes for most groups, actually, so it's very rare that you find a group that has more idiots than your own group, which is... it's kind of horrifying. At the same time, I think it's a good starting point. Yeah, politicians are people too. Political systems are flawed, but then again, our organizations are flawed. We just need to figure out ways of making them better. As for something that freaks me out, I've been trying to come up with something. All the really disturbing stuff I got in my head, the problem is, as soon as I get freaked out by something, I learn to get used to it and start thinking, maybe trepanation, well, I wouldn't do it, but well, maybe they have something, a morphological freedom and all of that. Yeah, why not? Nano-weapons, well, yeah, but I think the bioweapons I can come up with are probably yuckier, and so on. Because once you stop being freaked out and realize, this is a weird possibility, let's do something about it or do something with it if it's positive.
Dean.
What scares me is the conflation of ideological objectives, whether it's to do with changing the political system or economic system, which frankly we will be arguing with not just for 10 years but 100, with real and tangible and possible fixes to specific problems. And if we couple the two, the practical and the impractical, we'll get nowhere. And so I think we need to be having specific tasks for things like mitigating inevitable climate change. I think we need to be able to have flexibility to deal with threats such as new forms of weapons or diseases, and actually even build in the flexibility and response, and we can then sit in the pub and argue about democracy and capitalism as long as we like as a separate issue.
Yeah, what personally freaks me out most is the notion that we're living in a multiverse, but we won't go into that here. On a slightly more practical level, yes, as transhumanists we think about the exotic risks, but I think our greatest risk is actually much more mundane, that we're currently spending something like $1.5 trillion each year on weapon systems. They're going to be used. Now, possibly in the case of nuclear weapons, it will merely be a theatre nuclear conflict in which perhaps 50 to 100 million people die, but it could very easily be a thermonuclear conflict. And I think there is a very significant likelihood, unless we systematically arrange for nuclear disarmament, then there is going to be thermonuclear war this century. And as a final note, yes, as I said, what I find extremely disturbing is the way our species treats non-human animals with the same capacity to suffer as human babies and pre-linguistic toddlers, and I think we need a moral revolution as well as a technological one.
What creeps me out? So if Nick Bostrom's simulation argument turns out to be true, we are living in a simulation, and that this is the simulation where Mormonism is true. That would be scary. Other than that if with my biochemistry that I lived forever and I still wasn't happy, that would scare me. What was the other question? About politics, that's right. So politicians, I'm a little skeptical. What definitely does seem to be working, or at least standing here right now, it feels like it's working, is not the top-down but the grassroots approach. Us coming together and talking about this and actually feeling like a community. Since I have the luxury of the last words, I want to extend my thanks not just to the other speakers, but to David Wood in particular for putting this whole thing together.
So, who said that was the last word? This is, of course, not the last word. There are so many people with their hands up who are really keen to ask more questions. It is, however, 5:30, so we will stop. But we will continue the discussion. Somebody asked the question, are we putting our money where our mouth is? Well, I'm not betting on any particular prediction, but I am betting on this, that the future is going to become more and more important. And that that's because people will realize, everybody's going to realize that society is changing and technology is changing faster. So more and more people are going to be interested in the future. And I am determined that when more and more people are asking these questions, there are good answers available through this group of people and others. So I'm going to keep putting a significant amount of my personal time, for whatever that's worth, into building a movement with more thoughtful and wide-ranging views, studies of this futurist topics. Now, how is that going to work in practice? We're not sure, but the conversation will continue. It can continue in various ways. First of all, Meetup will ask all of you, what did you think of this event? And please, on the whole, give some positive feedback. That helps the Meetup to grow. Also give us constructive suggestions on how to do things better in the future. And because we were very ambitious in this event, we know that many things didn't quite work as smoothly as could have done. So please give us your suggestions on how we should run future events. You can also respond in due course to a SurveyMonkey survey, which will probably end up in your inbox, those of you who are receiving emails. If you feel like responding to that, please do so. And then get involved in larger discussions, which will take place, I hope, on the London Futurist site. And having said all that, I think it is appropriate to give a very warm round of thanks to all the speakers on both days, because they've given a great deal of their time. They all had to prepare new material for this. I quizzed each of them what exactly you're going to say, and they've done a great job in preparing that. And at the same time, I would like to give a warm round of applause to the organisation team that's been running around doing a whole bunch of things. There's Mark Goodman in the front here, there's Brian Hall in the back, and there's my better half, Hessen, who has made this possible. So thanks to all the speakers and all the volunteers. Thank you.